Welcome back to the deep dive, where we sift through the research so you don't have to.
Yeah.
Today we're tackling something that might sound a bit dry at first.
Mm.
Interim valuations and payments in UK construction contracts.
Oh, yeah.
But trust me, this is where the real money talks.
Yeah.
And whether you're in the industry or just dreaming of your own home renovation,
Yeah.
understanding this stuff can save you headaches down the line.
Oh, you got that right. It's the financial heartbeat of any construction project.
Yeah.
And the Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors, or RICS, has put together a fantastic guide that we'll be using for this deep dive.
Okay.
They're the authority on this, so we're in good hands.
Okay, so before we get lost in the weeds,
Right.
can you paint the big picture for us?
Sure.
Why do we even need these interim valuations? It's not like you pay for a whole house up front before they lay a single brick, right?
Right. Think of it as progress reports, but for money.
Okay.
Construction projects are long hauls, and both the contractor doing the work and the employer paying for it need to know things are moving along financially.
Right.
These valuations are like checkpoints that say, okay, this much work is done, so this much money is owed.
Yeah.
It keeps the cash flowing in the project on track.
So it's all about making sure everyone gets paid fairly as the project progresses.
Exactly.
But who's actually crunching these numbers? Is it some superpowered accountant with a hard hat?
That would be the quantity surveyor.
Okay.
They're the financial wizards of the construction world.
Okay.
They're the ones who meticulously assess the value of the work completed and make sure everything adds up.
Now, I'm guessing the type of contract involved plays a big role in how these valuations work.
Absolutely.
What are some of the common ones we see in the UK?
There are a few key players.
Yeah.
And you're spot on. The contract type is critical.
Okay.
You've got your lump sum contracts where the price is fixed up front for the entire project.
Okay.
Then there are cost reimbursable contracts where payments are tied to the actual costs incurred. Each one has its own implications for how those interim valuations are done.
So for a lump sum contract, the valuation would be about figuring out what percentage of the total work is done right.
Yeah.
Like if 25% of the house is built, they get 25% of the money.
Exactly. It's all about proportional progress.
Okay.
But with cost reimbursable contracts, it gets a bit more granular.
Okay.
The quantity surveyor needs to verify all the expenses, making sure they're legitimate and in line with the contract.
That sounds like it could get messy if things aren't documented clearly.
You're telling me
Yeah.
clear communication and meticulous records are crucial here.
Okay.
And speaking of keeping things above board, the UK has some important legal frameworks in place
Okay.
to govern all of this financial maneuvering.
Okay.
The big one is the Housing Grants Construction and Regeneration Act of 1996,
Okay.
often called the Construction Act for short.
The Construction Act, huh?
Yep.
What's its role in this whole process?
It lays down the law literally on things like payment timelines and procedures.
Okay.
It's there to protect both the contractor and the employer and ensure that payments are handled fairly and transparently.
So it's like the rule book for the financial game of construction.
Exactly, and it helps prevent those nasty payment disputes that can sometimes pop up.
Okay, so we've got our players.
Yeah.
We've got our contract types, and we've got the legal framework.
Right.
Now let's actually dive into the valuation process itself.
Okay.
What are the steps involved in creating one of these interim valuations?
Well, the RICS guide lays out a pretty clear 6-step process.
Okay.
It starts with planning,
Okay.
where the quantity surveyor gathers all the intel, the contract details the project timeline, the payment procedures.
Yeah.
They're essentially setting the stage for accurate valuations.
So it's all about being prepared and understanding the ground rules before diving into the numbers.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Then comes the pre-valuation stage, where they collect all the necessary documentation, contracts, drawings, progress reports,
Yeah.
and might even conduct site visits to get a real feel for how things are progressing.
So it's not just about crunching numbers in an office.
Right.
It's about getting your boots on the ground and seeing the project firsthand.
Exactly. It's the only way to accurately assess the value of the work done.
Okay.
And that brings us to step 3, the actual valuation itself.
Okay.
This is where the quantity surveyor applies their expertise and determines the monetary value of all that completed work.
And how do they actually do that? Is
Yeah.
it a simple matter of measuring square footage or counting bricks?
If only it were that simple.
Okay.
There's a whole toolbox of methods they can use, depending on the project and the contract.
Ooh, intrigue. Tell me more about these methods.
One common approach is the bill of quantities method.
Okay.
It breaks the project down into specific items of work, each with a predefined quantity and a unit rate. So let's say you need 10,000 bricks, and each brick costs £1.
Right.
If the contractor has laid 5,000 bricks, their work for that item would be valued at £5,000.
Okay.
Then you have things like priced activity schedules, which group similar tasks together and assign a lump sum for each group. And there are also stage payments tied to specific milestones in the project.
Okay.
Hit a milestone, get a payment.
Okay, so there's quite a bit of flexibility in how these valuations are approached. But what happens once the quantity surveyor has crunched the numbers and arrived at a figure is that...
Not quite. The next step is validation.
Okay.
Another qualified professional reviews the valuation, double-checking everything to minimize errors.
Okay.
It's all about ensuring accuracy and fairness.
So it's like a system of checks and balances for the financial side of the project.
Exactly. And once the valuation is validated, it's time for the certifier to issue a certificate.
Okay.
This document officially outlines the amount due to the contractor and triggers the payment process.
What happens next?
Well, that leads us to the final step in the process.
Okay.
Post-valuation.
Okay.
This is where records are updated and any issues or discrepancies are ironed out.
Yeah.
It's all about closing the loop and ensuring everything is squared away.
Okay, so we've got this meticulous 6-step process for creating these interim valuations. But there's got to be more to the story, right?
Oh, you bet.
What about variations to the contract or potential issues that can arise?
Things rarely go exactly according to plan in construction.
Right.
But we're getting a bit ahead of ourselves.
Okay.
Maybe we should save those juicy details for part 2 of our deep dive.
I like where this is going.
Yeah.
We'll be back soon to unpack those what-ifs and explore the potential pitfalls that lurk in the world of construction contracts. Until then, start thinking about those home renovations and how these valuations might come into play. You might be surprised.
Indeed.
Welcome back to the deep dive.
Yeah.
We're knee-deep in the world of interim valuations and payments in UK construction contracts.
That's right. Last time we covered the basics,
right?
Why we need valuations, the different types of contracts, and that crucial 6-step process.
Yeah.
But now it's time to dig into some of the finer points that can really make or break a project.
Okay, and I know you teased some juicy details about variations and potential pitfalls, so spill the beans.
All right.
What happens when a project needs a few tweaks here and there?
Variations.
Yeah.
The inevitable curveballs of construction.
Right.
It's rare that a project goes exactly according to the original plan.
Okay.
You might need to add a feature change material or adjust a design element.
Yeah.
All of these are considered variations.
Okay.
And they can significantly impact the project's cost and timeline.
So if you're adding a fancy new bathroom or changing the layout, that all needs to be accounted for in the valuations.
Absolutely. Every variation needs to be formally agreed upon in writing.
Right.
With its impact on costs clearly outlined.
Okay.
Think of it as mini contracts within the main contract.
No more handshake deals or back-of-the-napkin sketches, huh?
Precisely clear documentation is key to avoiding disputes and ensuring everyone's on the same page.
Okay.
And speaking of safeguards, another important concept to understand is retention.
Retention, I've heard that term thrown around before, but I'm not quite sure what it entails.
Okay, so imagine you commission a portrait.
Okay.
But instead of paying the artist the full amount up front, you hold back a portion of the payment until you see the final result.
Okay.
That's essentially what retention is in construction.
So it's like an insurance policy for the employer to make sure the work is done properly.
Exactly. A percentage, usually around 5%, is withheld from the contractor's payments until the project is complete and any defects are addressed.
Right.
It gives the employer leverage to ensure everything is up to snuff.
That makes sense. But what happens to that retained money in the meantime?
Yeah.
Does it just sit in a bank account somewhere?
There are a couple ways to handle it.
Okay.
One is using an escrow account, which is basically a neutral third-party account where the money is held until it's released according to agreed-upon terms.
So it's like a safe holding place for the money, ensuring it's used for its intended purpose.
Exactly. Another option is a retention bond.
Okay.
Where the contractor obtains a bond from a surety company for the amount of the retention.
So it's like a financial guarantee from a third party.
You got it.
Okay.
If defects need to be remedied and the contractor fails to do so, the employer can claim against the bond.
Interesting. So there are different ways to provide that financial security for the employer. Are there any pros and cons to consider when choosing between escrow accounts and retention bonds?
Well, escrow accounts are generally seen as more transparent and straightforward.
Okay.
But setting them up and managing them can involve some administrative overhead.
Right.
Retention bonds, on the other hand,
Yeah.
can be quicker and easier to arrange, what often come with a fee for the contractor.
Okay.
The best choice often depends on the specifics of the project and the preferences of the parties involved.
Okay, that's retention demystified. Now, what about materials and goods that are needed for the project?
Right.
How are those factored into the valuations, especially when they might not even be on site yet?
That's a great question. Valuing off-site materials can be a bit tricky.
Okay.
Because ownership might not have transferred yet.
Right.
Let's say a contractor orders a truckload of timber.
Yeah.
But it's still sitting at the lumberyard.
Right.
It needs to be clear who owns that timber for valuation purposes.
So it's not just about the physical location of the materials, but also the legal ownership?
Exactly. The RICS guidance delves into this, emphasizing the importance of clear contractual clauses that outline payment terms and ownership transfer procedures for off-site materials.
Okay.
The bottom line is that clear documentation and a solid paper trail are essential to avoid confusion and potential disputes.
Makes sense. You don't want any surprises or assumptions when it comes to those big-ticket items.
Right.
Now, are there any other special considerations that come into play when we're talking about valuations?
Oh, yes. Plenty. For one, the guidance touches on the complexities of valuing work that hasn't been properly executed.
Okay.
If a wall is built crooked or a roof leaks, that needs to be factored into the valuation.
So it's not just about measuring what's there, but also assessing the quality of the work?
Precisely. The quantity surveyor has to determine the extent of any defects.
Okay.
And adjust the valuation accordingly.
Okay, that makes sense. Are there any other curveballs that we should be aware of?
Well, sometimes the certifier might fail to issue an interim certificate on time, which can throw a wrench into the payment process.
Okay.
Or an employer might issue a pay less notice, reducing the amount paid to the contractor due to a dispute or concern about the work.
Pay less notice, that sounds a bit ominous.
It can be, but it's a mechanism that's designed to protect the employer's interests.
Okay.
It's not something that can be done arbitrarily.
Right.
There have to be valid reasons and clear procedures outlined in the contract.
So there are safeguards in place to prevent unfair payment cuts?
Right.
But what happens if a genuine dispute arises between the contractor and the employer? How are those resolved?
The guidance strongly encourages open communication and trying to resolve disputes amicably whenever possible.
So talk it out before lawyering up?
Exactly. But it also recognizes that sometimes formal dispute resolution mechanisms are needed, like adjudication.
Okay.
Which is a faster and less expensive alternative to going to court.
Okay, so there are options for resolving conflicts. Now, one last term I've heard floating around is liquidated damages. What are those and how do they fit into this whole picture?
Liquidated damages are a pre-agreed amount of money that the contractor has to pay the employer for each day or week that the project is delayed beyond the agreed completion date.
So it's like a financial penalty for running behind schedule?
That's a good way to put it.
Okay.
They're designed to compensate the employer for losses incurred due to the delay.
But how are those damages calculated? Is it just an arbitrary number?
Not at all. They have to be a genuine pre-estimate of the actual losses the employer is likely to suffer due to the delay.
Okay.
They can't be used as a punishment, but rather as a fair way to address the financial impact of delays.
Makes sense. Now, I know we've covered a lot of ground here, but I feel like we're just scratching the surface.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you'd like to share before we wrap up this part of our deep dive?
Well, maybe we could delve into some real-world examples in part 3.
Go ahead.
To illustrate how all of these concepts come together in practice.
I like it. Real-world examples always make things clearer. We'll be back soon to explore those, and hopefully by the end of this deep dive, our listeners will be well-equipped to navigate the complex but fascinating world of construction valuations and payments. Welcome back to the deep dive. We've spent the last 2 parts wading through the intricacies of interim valuations and payments in UK construction contracts.
We've talked about the key players, different types of contracts, the 6-step valuation process, and even those tricky situations like variations and disputes.
But I think it's time to bring all this to life with a real-world example ready to put on our construction hats.
Let's do it. Imagine a scenario where a developer is building a new apartment complex. Let's say it's a sleek, modern building with 50 units.
Okay.
Right in the heart of London.
Okay, I can picture it, cranes swinging concrete, pouring the whole urban symphony.
Yeah.
What kind of contract are we dealing with here?
Let's say they opted for a lump sum contract with a total price tag of £10 million. The contract stipulates that interim valuations will be carried out every month to track the progress and payments.
£10 million? That's a serious chunk of change. So each month, the quantity surveyor steps in, assesses how much of the work is done.
Right.
And calculates the corresponding payment.
That's the gist of it. Yeah. Let's say in the first month, the contractor focuses on the excavation and foundation work.
Okay.
Which represents about 5% of the total project value.
So according to our trusty lump sum logic, they'd be entitled to receive 5% of the £10 million, which is, let me do the math, £500,000.
Right. You are, however, we can't forget about retention.
Oh.
Let's assume a standard 5% retention rate is in play.
Ah, right. That means £25,000 would be held back as retention?
Yeah.
Leaving the contractor with a payment of £475,000 for the first month.
Precisely. Now let's fast forward a few months. The project is humming along, the structure is rising, and everyone's feeling good. But then, bam, unexpected ground conditions are discovered.
Oh, that doesn't sound good. Didn't we talk about this earlier? Delays, disputes, the whole shebang.
Exactly. This is where things can get tricky.
Right.
Let's say the contract includes a provision for liquidated damages at a rate of £15,000 per week of delay.
So for every week the project is behind schedule, the contractor has to pay a hefty £15,000. Ouch.
It is a significant penalty.
Yeah.
Now, the crucial question is, who's responsible for this delay?
Right.
If it's due to factors outside the contractor's control, like those unforeseen ground conditions, they might be able to claim an extension of time.
So they could potentially avoid those liquidated damages if they can prove they're not at fault.
Exactly. But it all hinges on the specifics of the contract, the evidence presented, and how the delay is communicated and documented.
Right.
It highlights the importance of clear communication and meticulous record-keeping throughout the entire project lifecycle.
This example really brings to life how interconnected all these elements are. The contract terms, the valuations, the potential pitfalls, the communication flow.
It's like a carefully choreographed dance where every step influences the next. And understanding the steps, the music, and the potential missteps is crucial for everyone involved in the project, from the developer to the contractor to, yes, even the quantity surveyor.
Absolutely. It's not just about numbers on a spreadsheet. It's about managing expectations, navigating complexities, and ultimately ensuring a successful project for everyone involved.
Well said. Hopefully this deep dive has shed some light on this often overlooked, but incredibly important aspect of construction.
We've covered a lot of ground, from the basic purpose of valuations to those nail-biting scenarios that can arise.
We've explored the different types of contracts, the step-by-step valuation process, and even delved into the legal framework that governs it all.
If you're planning a construction project, big or small, remember that understanding these concepts can save you a lot of headaches down the line.
And don't forget that fantastic RICS guidance document we've been referring to.
Yeah.
It's a treasure trove of information and practical advice.
So there you have it. Next time you see a construction site, you'll have a newfound appreciation for the intricate world of valuations and payments happening behind the scenes.
Yeah.
It's more than just bricks and mortar. It's a carefully orchestrated financial symphony that keeps those projects moving forward.
Until next time.